Dr. Winters was showing a client out when two shadows came up the sidewalk in front of her office. They were talking loudly, getting louder the larger they grew in the pebbled glass of her front door. But there was something between them, lost amidst their shadow. It was a child, or maybe a little person, Winter thought. And as the door came open, she saw a girl, accompanied by two arguing police officers. One was tall, a real David Duchovny type, with short dark hair and a jawline that could cut paper. He had a hand on the child, a kiddo with a nearly bald head, and a lot of little marks on her face. The other, unfortunately, was their temporary Sheriff Guthrie, and that was the worst news all day. I just think that, as a professional courtesy, you might tell me you were planning to do business in my town. The other cop turned to look at Guthrie, and the disdain was writ large across his face. Temporary Sheriff Guthrie, as I have told you a few times before, I don't work for you. You followed my car into town, you accosted me on the street in front of witnesses, and then you tried to impose yourself in this case. I don't know how they do things here in Kashmir, but this is considered highly irregular in Atlanta. It's Sheriff Guthrie, he said, smiling and making it look painful. Not from what I hear, the other officer said. He was a head taller than Guthrie, and so the temporary sheriff's attempt to intimidate him was laughable. Gentlemen, Dr. Winters said, drawing the attention of both men and a quick glance from the child. Is there something I can help you with? If not, I recommend you take your riveting, if not needlessly loud, endowment speculation outside. The officer stepped past Guthrie, extending a hand. Sheriff Michael Haynes of Atlanta PD. Ma'am, I spoke with your receptionist on the phone. I have a 1:30 appointment. Winters checked the clock and found that it was 1:20. He was punctual. That was a change from the other sheriff in the room, who called and just expected her to make time. Of course, Dr. Winters said, showing him into the back. Sheriff Guthrie attempted to follow, but Winter put a hand out to stop him. Sheriff Guthrie, I can't let you into the session. Patient confidentiality and all. He craned his neck, watching Sheriff Haynes and the kid walk into room 4. Perhaps I should stay, he said, looking at Winters with agitation. Make sure Sheriff Haynes has every available resource of our town, whatever we can grant him. He puffed out his chest a little, but he was no more intimidating to Dr. Winter than he had been to Sheriff Haynes. I think not, and you might want to be careful, Sheriff, she said, purposefully not adding the temporary part. And why is that, Dr. Winters? He asked, bristling slightly. You wouldn't want people saying you were violating people's civil rights not this close to election time, would you? She looked at her left and let her eyes drift to Juliet, who was trying very hard to look like she wasn't eavesdropping on their conversation. Fine, Guthrie said, but if he needs anything, you tell him to call me. He stomped off like an angry child, and Dr. Winters went to go see what all the fuss was about. She found the sheriff and his young friend in room 4, the kiddo sitting on the couch and the sheriff standing by the window, watching Sheriff Guthrie roll away. Haynes didn't seem overly gleeful to see Guthrie go, which Winter found refreshing. He wasn't just trying to come into a small town and swing his dick around, and that made her respect him a little bit. The kiddo he had brought in was strange, to say the least. Winter dealt with kids pretty often, but few like this. There was no chatter, no leg swinging, no random comments, or even an introduction. She didn't shyly try to tell Winter her name, ask her about the pictures on the wall, or if she could play with the tea set. They didn't say anything, in fact. They just sat there, eyes on the floor, and Winter wondered if the child were mute. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Haynes said as she came in. "Of course," Dr. Winters said, smiling as she offered him her hand. "What is this all about, sir?" I need someone who has a good track record with kids, and this one could be a little difficult." Winters nodded, stooping down so that she could get on eye level with the kiddo. It was hard to tell from her short hair and her ill-fitting clothes, but she was in fact a girl, it seemed, and she couldn't have been more than about 6. Someone had shaved her head very recently. The hair had grown back, coarse and springy, and Winter could see marks on her face that looked like runes. They had been cut there, the marks healing but still looking painful. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the terrified look in her eye when she peeked at Winters, like she expected to be slapped or beaten at any moment. "Hello, I'm Pamela. It's nice to meet you." Dr. Winters extended a hand, but the girl made no effort to take it or to introduce herself. Winter looked at Haynes, but he only shrugged. "She hasn't said a word for 3 days, at least the 3 days she's been in police custody. I was hoping maybe you had some tricks to getting them to open up or something." Dr. Winters nodded. "What's your name?" "Marcy." The name resonated for a moment, but Winter didn't have time to think too much about it. Would you like some tea, Marcy?" she asked suddenly, turning around to the hot plate. There was still half a pot left from the earlier client, and Winter thought it might be just the thing to help ease the girl. "I find it's just the thing for when I'm feeling unsure of myself." Marcy sat quietly for a moment as Winter got a cup down, but as she filled it with the hot tea, she could almost feel the moment when the girl looked up. "What kind of tea is it?" Marcy asked, and even Sheriff Haynes looked surprised. "It's ginseng and green tea and winter cherry. It's very tasty, especially with a little honey. Would you like some?" "Yes, please," the little girl said. Winter fixed her a cup and brought it over, setting it down on the table as opposed to just handing it to her. Sometimes, especially if her patients were feeling nervous, they liked to pick it up themselves. That usually made it seem like it was their idea, as opposed to something that she had forced on them. When some of them realized the secrets that they had told her, it also made it easier to convince them that it was something they had wanted to get off their chest. Winter didn't know if this little girl had any secrets, but the sheriff seemed to think she did, and Winter wanted to help her, if she could. Marcy picked up the cup and took a sip, wincing at the heat, but smiling at the taste. "It's yummy," she said, and Sheriff Haynes looked at the good doctor like she might be some sort of witch. If Sheriff Haynes knew what Dr. Winters actually was, he would have never brought this little girl or any other person to see her. Winter cherry helps people remember things, even things they don't necessarily want to remember. Do you have anything like that, Marcy? Do you have anything that you don't want to remember? The girl thought about it, and finally nodded her nearly bald head, slowly and sadly. "Would you like to tell me?" Dr. Winters asked her, using her best talking-to-children voice to try to put the girl at ease. "I was taken from the house I was at," Marcy began. "It was nighttime, and a man in a funny mask came in and put something over my face. I'd woken up because I was thirsty, but when I saw him, I got scared and couldn't move. When he put the thing over my face, I went back to sleep, and I woke up in the woods." "What were you doing in the woods?" Dr. Winters asked her. "I was being carried. When I asked the man what we were doing, he said my new name was December, and I was here for a special reason. My face hurt really bad, and My head felt cold, but I was so scared that I didn't dare make a sound and just hoped he wouldn't hurt me too badly. Winter looked at Sheriff Haynes, but he twirled his hands, inviting her to continue. Winter looked at the girl, seeing her fully in the grasp of the tea, and decided to see how much she could remember. "Then what happened?" Winter asked. "He sat me down in a place with other children. There were 5 others, 2 girls and 3 boys, but they were sleeping. I think I was supposed to be asleep too. They said things to the man who had brought me, things I couldn't hear, but they seemed to be mad at him that I was awake. He put a cloth over my mouth again, and I got a little sleepy, but I didn't go to sleep. They had them in a circle, and as they began to speak, they called all of them the names of the month: September and October, November and December, me, January and February. I was near the woods, just kind of laying there, so I could see them when they... But she started stuttering, shaking as she remembered what had happened. "It's okay, you're safe here. They can't hurt you." She was shaking, her eyes back on her hands, and they were clutching at her sweatpants like anxious animals. "They started talking funny, saying things I didn't understand, and then they started stabbing the other kids. They started with February and September, saying something like a spell as they went around the circle. I was starting to feel like I could run. My legs were shaky, but they would work. But that's when something appeared in the circle." Winter felt cold inside. What was it? It looked like a knight. He was on a big horse, and he was all green. He looked down at me. The people killing the kids stopped to look at him, and that was when I ran. I rolled away from the person that had brought me. His eyes were on the knight, and he didn't notice. I ran into the woods. I ran, and I ran, and I ran until I couldn't run anymore. Then, once it was light out, someone found me, took me to the police station. That's why the sheriff brought me here. He wanted to know what had happened in the woods that night, but I couldn't talk about it. I was too scared, and the scaredness, it made my tongue stop working." She slumped back then, looking like a robot who had run out of batteries. She didn't say another word in Dr. Winters' office, and if she ever spoke again, Winters was unaware of it. Dr. Winters, on the other hand, understood more than the girl knew. She had met that night. She had fought that night, and the idea that he was back for the season was a little off-putting. She would cross that bridge when and if it came, but it was something to keep in mind. Dr. Winters stood up, leaving the girl with her thoughts. "I assume that's what you wanted?" she asked, and the sheriff nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Many thanks for your help." "Care to tell me who this girl is now?" Winters asked, a little put out and feeling used for something bigger than it appeared. "Any chance you've followed the abductions around Atlanta?" "A case of the missing kids?" she asked. "Yeah, but I thought they had found all the kids killed in the woods outside of Cumming." Those had been particularly grisly slangs. The word ritualistic had been thrown around a lot, and the media made it pretty clear that they suspected the kids had been abducted for some sort of pagan rite, especially this close to Halloween. The media was always quick to blame the large pagan community in Georgia, a community that did very little magic these days and more took care of itself through camaraderie. But she supposed it would always be like that. They needed someone to blame, after all, and the unknown was as good as anything. They were, Sheriff Haynes said. Except for her. That's Marcy Haywood, the only survivor of whatever the hell those weirdos were doing out there. They had been careful not to abduct anyone too high profile. There had been 2 kids from an orphanage, 2 kids in foster care, and 2 kids from low-income families that trusted their kiddos to let themselves in after school. Marcy had been one of the kids from a foster home, and Winter doubted that she would have any trouble getting adopted after this. She would be a small celebrity once they realized she wasn't dead, though this kind of fame could be just as bad. "What happened to the people who did this?" she asked, and Hayes only shrugged. "We don't know. We were following a tip the next day when we found Marcy, and it's lucky that we did, or else we'd have no idea, or any suspects to boot." Haynes said his goodbyes then, taking Marcy with him, and Winter was left thinking. She had known that he would be in the world again. He likely came back every year, but she hoped he would give Kashmir a wide berth after last year. If he didn't, however, she'd be ready. Kashmir was, after all, always full of hospitality. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.